All right, everyone, we start off today with the delirious level of cope that we're beginning to see from the liberals right now, based on a combination of polling, hype and hyperbole, and people like black creators in the internet circuit. Something has shifted over the last few days. What could it be? The legal system is now being trotted out to persecute Donald Trump on spurious charges because they're afraid of him. Now, the original tagline, and conservatives are bad at messaging. We'll get into that as well. So maybe blunted effect, take note here. Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, a lifelong Republican tradition for a very long time at least. Right now, Donald Trump's mugshot is the number one meme making the circuit, so to speak. And of course, he looks very dour there. He looks like, I'm the deposed emperor, basically, is what that mugshot entails. And liberals, it's interesting. They're claiming the mugshot doesn't do anything. You're being racist if you claim that black voters would possibly rally around Trump because he got arrested. You're being racist. You're claiming that black people are criminals. That's not what's being claimed. That's the spin that liberals are going with, because right now they're really hurting. They've already begun to hemorrhage Hispanic votes because basically all they want to do is keep the border open and tell someone who's the grandchild of a successful immigrant that built a small business and now they've gone to college. They got a fucking master's degree and they own their own businesses too. They're being told that they need to identify with someone who just scrabbled their way across the border. And what they're not understanding is the majority of Hispanic voters were legal to begin with. They went through the process. They came because they had a skill, they got a job, they got an education, they served in the military. And I think there's a growing sense of resentment towards the Democratic Party among a group of people that have uplifted themselves in large part in many cases, and again are being identified with people who have broken the law to enter the country, aren't really entitled to work, but the government just ignores it anyway, and then compete with those legal immigrants. In many cases, they're third, fourth gen at this point, for jobs. That's among Hispanics. Among black voters, again, I think there's a rising resentment. I'm certainly seeing it myself. And some of these people that I see saying, dicks out for Trump at this point, these are not rock-ribbed conservatives. Some of these people are clearly liberal individuals, and they're going off the plantation, so to speak. That's because the Democratic Party doesn't uplift their communities. And as far as the Trump mugshot goes, what it's really about is what white liberals have been peddling for decades, and they're not entirely wrong. They've just done a 180 recently. Haven't we been told by every liberal commentator under the sun, mostly white individuals, that differential enforcement, heavy-handed policing tactics, systemic problems with, look at CRT. What does it propose? The justice system is built by white people for white people. Well, Trump is white. It doesn't seem to be working for him now, does it? They then revert to the cope, well, he broke the law. Nobody's above the law. Well, that's not what you've been saying for decades and decades. Since I was a little kid, there used to be reports on TV like NBC Nighttime News, and it'd be about, how LAPD was planting crack in black people's cars and then prosecuting them for it. It's entirely possible for a person to be prosecuted, especially in this sense, wall of charge mode, without having done anything wrong. The problem is that the liberals were the ones making that argument to pretty much every black person currently alive in the United States, and now it's being done to somebody who is high profile and white, and people are beginning to put two and two together. It's not that anyone's claiming, well, black people are criminals, so they identify with the criminal. No, black people have been legally persecuted, and so they're agreeing with the person who's being legally persecuted. Now, you've got new polling as of the last election. You had 8% support in 2020 for Trump among black citizens. It's jumped to 20% now. Joe Biden, meanwhile, went from about 90% to roughly 60% at this moment. That, by the way, that means there's a huge undecided gap. If black voters lean towards independent status and don't really go with the party affiliation thing anymore, you could see a bizarre scenario in which states that have been powerfully blue, mainly because they've got urban areas that tend to lean heavily Democrat, and much of that is overlap with minority communities. If that changes, even by a 10-point margin, it doesn't need to change by any more than that. If the Democrats no longer have a super majority in a city like Atlanta, because, you know, they no longer have absolute support among those blocks within the public, racially speaking. They would no longer be hyper-competitive in Georgia. It would definitely hurt them in Virginia. You're looking at like the D.C. suburbs and so forth, Richmond, some of the bigger cities, which have large minority populations. If they're not able to counterbalance the overwhelmingly Republican rural areas and small towns, you probably lose Virginia. You're looking at Wisconsin, by the way, their Supreme Court now is lurched left, so the Republicans shouldn't bother to campaign there. They can expect the honkening to take Wisconsin for the Democrats no matter what the voting totals are. You could think of a situation in which areas like the Pacific Northwest, they had been swing states up until the last decade and a half or so. They've gone much more blue now. Much of that is at this point due to white liberals. It's not necessarily due to the Hispanic or black populations therein, certainly not the Asian populations, because they keep getting lumped in with this nonsensical BIPOC that the Democrats have developed as a sort of sloganeering attempt to gain votes. Well, you're from the Philippines. You're basically the same as this other person. They're from Ghana. Well, I mean, if I was in any of those groups of people, I would find that to be mildly offensive. Of course, I'm an individualist, so I say it's offensive when any group of people is specifically, pigeonholed, and I prefer to look at what individuals have done. So there are people that are of any race, of both genders. There are two, any creed, etc. That are good and hardworking, and they don't do any wrong, and then there are shitfucks within any of those groups of people. The Democrats have carefully curated a different schema that is advantageous for voting purposes. It's really what it is. You've got to understand, too, the Democrats are led by rich white liberals. They're not led by a populist leader like the GOP at this point, and their entire answer is, hey, you know the programs that we've been peddling for the last half century that haven't worked and haven't actually uplifted you or your black community? We're going to double down on them. Well, again, drawing a comparison between somebody who just came over the border illegally from Mexico, having come from Costa Rica, to somebody whose grandparents came from Nigeria 50 years ago, set up a business, and now they're a millionaire, but they're being told that they're the same thing. I think that it's beginning to rankle more people, and as the system breaks down, there's one silver lining. As the system gets worse, and under Biden it has inarguably gotten much, much worse, I'm seeing more individualism and independent voting patterns. Independence surging in 2020 and 2022, and that trend appears to be continuing. People are actually gaining more of an individualistic consciousness simply because they realize that the system is breaking down. Those old norms that have been established in the neocon, neolib sort of consensus order post-Ronald Reagan have begun to die out. It's no longer the same GOP. It's also no longer the same Democratic Party. You know, before Bernie Sanders was considered the befuddled funny dude. Now they've got a whole socialist bloc within the House. They've got the Geek Squad. They've got a number of people who are effectively socialistic like Fetterman in the Senate. It's not just Sanders anymore. The Democratic Party is shifting hard left. They're offering a doubling down on the same policies that are ripping inner city ghettos apart even more. If the ghetto was bad 20 years ago, it's gotten worse now. Despite huge amounts of money being thrown at urban education, the educational rate keeps falling. It's because of the corrupt administrative body and the teachers' unions, again, championed by Democrats. And to say that Donald Trump or anyone else is claiming that because Trump is a criminal, blacks identify with him is completely missing the mark. They're coping and spinning that because they're losing control. They're afraid. So they're resorting to their usual line. You are racist. Oh, you claim not to be racist? Well, only a racist would say that. It's actually rather pathetic. That's about all. Peace out.